All 56 Commonwealth member countries are attending the two-day meeting, which kicked off with a retreat yesterday. Delegates include Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa, Botswana, Mauritius, Sierra Leone and Zambia. The CFAMM is significant as it will signal the start of Commonwealth Day activities marked every year on the second Monday in March. The Foreign Affairs Ministers will address the role of the Commonwealth in a fast-changing international landscape and explore impactful and transformative solutions to unlock opportunities together for shared prosperity across the Commonwealth in the face of a fractured global climate. At least 14 people have been killed when an inflatable boat carrying migrants crashed into a Turkish Coast Guard vessel off Turkey's southern province of Antalya. In a statement, the Coast Guard said the high-speed boat was detected early on today off the coast of Finiki district of Antalya and that it tried to flee from the Coast Guard despite repeated warnings to stop. It later collided with a Coast Guard vessel. 6 migrants and 1 Turkish national were rescued. 15 others were caught after continuing in their boat until they reached land. Israel's emergency services say a man was killed and 2 people seriously wounded in the center of the country as Iranian missiles and drone strikes continue to hit the region. The Israeli military has accused Iran of using cluster munitions, which are harder to intercept. Reports describe at least half a dozen locations hit. The BBC's Yolandi Now has the details.
This is the first time there's been a deadly Iranian airstrike in Israel in just over a week. Emergency services say that paramedics pronounced 1 man dead at a construction site and took another to hospital. There are reports of at least half a dozen locations hit by cluster munitions in central Israel. Footage shared on social media in recent days has shown the use of such warheads, which break up into smaller bombs, making them difficult for air defences to intercept as they scatter over a wide area.
Recapping the top story, the Sawa Guinea's main opposition leader Selo Dalien Diallo says a war has been openly declared on President Mamadi Doumbouya's challenges. This comes after Doumbouya's administration issued a decree on Friday that 40 party headquarters and local offices would be closed and use of their logos, acronyms and other distinctive signs would be prohibited. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Jolani Tulo Mwepe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And South Africa's Blitzboks win their second successive tournament in Perth. India are the champions of the T20 2026 World Cup. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Business, trade, and investment opportunities that put the continent first. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni.
It has gone exactly 6 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. A very good afternoon to you, Egypt. Good afternoon, Kenya, Senegal, DRC. Good afternoon, Africa. Welcome to Africa in Business on Channel Africa. I'm Thami Ngubeni. It's Monday, the 9th of March. Here's what we've got in store for you this hour. Global oil prices have surged past $100 per barrel as the war involving Iran, the United States and Israel escalates. And South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is in Brazil for a state visit to boost economic and commercial relations. Do stay connected to Africa and the world with Channel Africa, the international voice of the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Watch or listen anytime, anywhere at channelafrica.co.za, on the Channel Africa mobile app and on SABC Plus or via the DSTV and OpenView audio bouquets. You can also catch us on social media at Channel Africa on Facebook and Channel Africa 1 on all other platforms. Channel Africa, first with the African story, globally.
Channel Africa is evolving, and so are you. Stay connected wherever you are with our brand new website and mobile app. Stream your favorite shows, catch up on African news, culture, and conversations, all at your fingertips.
Africa is just a tap away.
Your world, your stories, now on the go.
Stay connected wherever you are.
Visit channelafrica.co.za or download the Channel Africa app today. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
We start here this afternoon taking a look at the improved market sentiment and stronger commodity prices. They are expected to have helped support the South African economy in the year 2025. Stats SA will publish the fourth quarter GDP data tomorrow, which is Tuesday, following a turbulent year for business, mostly characterized by the impact of US trade tariffs. Economists anticipate the reading will likely moderate from the previous quarter's 0.5% expansion. SABC News economics reporter Nosipho Khatebe has more.
South Africa's economic growth outlook is expected to continue the positive run when the fourth quarter GDP figures are released. This was mainly helped by the precious metals rally, as noted by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana during his budget speech last month. Chief Investment Officer at Makwe Fund Managers, Makwe Masilela, says some sectors are anticipated to show some weakness, while others, like agriculture, will likely have improved.
And the likes of agriculture as well, we think they will come, continue to help the GDP, given that we continue to have a nice rise as well. Yes, we know the tariffs kicked in, but remember, we managed to get some markets as well to be able to export it to, so that help. My biggest concern is that we might continue to see manufacturing not doing that great, especially if you look into our November and December manufacturing production data. That continued not to be that great. So that might be a lackluster compared with the other ones. But yeah, sure, one expects to see a positive economic growth come Q4 of last year.
Masilela expects GDP growth of between 0.2% and 0.3% quarter on quarter, putting annualized growth at roughly 1.3%. Looking ahead, the outlook for the South African economy in 2026 appears somewhat better, although the conflict in the Middle East remains a key risk, particularly if it drags on or damages critical infrastructure.
Yes, we will feel it a little bit with some increase when it comes also to the likes of fertilizers, and that might include the crops, then ultimately food. And then we know that food inflation is one of the biggest concerns. But I think we'll get to a point where this will probably stop sooner than we think, and then probably will continue to have a decent, GDP growth going forward, given that we expect that interest rates will probably continue to go down. That's if this stops on time. We expect that inflation as well will moderate, and we expect that the Supreme Court ruling that we've seen from the US about the tariffs, probably that will help as well the global economies going forward.
Ultimately, the length of the US and Israeli airstrikes on Iran and Iran's retaliations will determine how inflation and interest rate expectations unfold. Nosipho Khatebe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Africa means business. Tune into Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni for the future of the African economy. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
As of today, global oil prices have surged past $100 per barrel. This is for the first time since 2022 due to the escalating war involving Iran, the United States and Israel. There are concerns that the spike in energy costs is driving up global inflation, threatening to stall economic recovery in Europe and Asia. Meanwhile, Allianz Trade, in its report, Conflict in the Middle East, Implications for Markets and Macro, highlights that while immediate market reactions to escalations are significant, long-term global economic damage hinges on how long the conflict lasts. For more on this, we joined on the line by Luke Morowitz, Allianz Trade's country manager for South Africa. A very good afternoon to you. Look, good to have you with us on African Business.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
So passage through the Strait of Hormuz, which is critical for 30% of global hydrocarbon flows, is still disrupted due to the Iran, US and Israel conflict. How do disruptions in this key maritime route in the Middle East affect global trade flows as well as shipping costs?
Yep. So as you said, 30% of seaborne hydrocarbons move through the Strait of Hormuz. It's currently down to about 70% of the normal traffic. 70% of the regular traffic has ceased and stopped moving. That obviously has major implications for energy prices. So I think in part what our report illustrates is that there's three specific scenarios which we've taken into consideration. And those three scenarios playing out will obviously have different prices or effects on the actual oil price at the end of the day. The baseline scenario forecasts that there would be an increase in the short term to $85 per barrel, but long term, once alternative supplies have been found and stocks move around the globe, you should see a normalization and a move back down to about $70. I think currently where we're sitting now, it's somewhere between our baseline scenario and our prolonged conflict scenario, where we anticipate the Brent crude price would surge up to about $100. But ultimately, again, stocks and supplies equalizing, there should be a normalization to around about $70 per barrel by the end of the year.
So what would a prolonged spike in oil prices actually mean for global inflation and interest rate expectations? This is obviously pre any sort of normalization.
Absolutely. So it's obviously not very positive. Apart from the fact that your day-to-day fuel costs will obviously spike and increase. There's a fairly substantial portion of the operating costs for freight transit, which is made up by fuel costs. So it's roughly speaking 35% of the operating costs. And we can anticipate that with a surge in fuel prices, that would increase freight costs by about 40 to 50%. Ultimately, those freight costs need to be passed along to consumers. So any sort of import that's brought into the country would obviously have that charge passed along. For South Africa specifically, currently as we speak, there's about a R2 to R2.40 under recovery on the fuel price. So I think it's been widely publicized already that fuel prices will most likely be going up at the end of the month, beginning of April. Again, very inflationary. The South African Reserve Bank has obviously recently set an inflation target of 3%. That will be very difficult to maintain or get even to within 1% of if we see the prolonged increase in fuel prices going forward.
And let's look at the larger economies, like the major economies, the likes of the United States, of Europe and China. How could these higher energy prices affect their growth prospects?
So again, I think it's a similar sort of impact. I think the likes of an America, for example, wouldn't necessarily be as heavily impacted as a developing economy such as South Africa would be. Obviously, America is maybe not entirely energy independent, but they do obviously have a fairly large shale industry, which does supplement whatever they might need to import from other oil-producing economies. We've forecast that in terms of the GDP. Again, depending on which scenario we look at for the reports, we're anticipating a 2.5% growth in GDP for the US this year. The prolonged conflict scenario basically drops that down from 2.5 to 2.3%, so a 0.2% percentage points decline. Again, that's also inflationary. The Federal Reserve's obviously been pressured to start cutting rates aggressively. I don't think that will be possible. Again, assuming there is a prolonged closure of the straits and obviously an increase in the oil price, which is a little bit longer than expected. One interesting thing I think with regards specifically to America is the midterm elections are coming up in November. So from a President Trump perspective, from a Republican Party perspective, they obviously want to try and have any sort of conflict in Iran resolved as quickly as possible. Again, I think based on the fact that inflation will start to increase if you've got those elevated energy prices for a very long period, and the impact it will have on the economy, it's obviously not going to be very positive for them in terms of a midterm election outcome. So hopefully that's, if you will, a bit of a bright light at the end of the tunnel. I think they, from a political perspective, obviously have quite a bit of a motivation to try and make sure that this doesn't last longer than is absolutely necessary.
And looking at the oil-producing African countries, the likes of Nigeria, Could they benefit from the current price environment?
Absolutely. I think obviously it's highly dependent on the sort of products that they are producing and exporting. There will obviously be a need to shift, and I think that's ultimately when we look at our scenarios, why we would say that in the short to medium term, you would obviously see a spike in the energy prices. Long term, as other suppliers are found or product is redistributed across the pre-existing channels, there would obviously be the likes of Nigeria, for example, that could benefit from additional sales of their oil reserves. Yeah.
And what is Allianz Trade's baseline scenario for oil prices over, let's say, the next 6 to 12 months, should the war continue?
So should the war continue, we do anticipate that, again, it's dependent on the scenario. As it stands now, roughly speaking, where we're sitting now, around about the $100 per barrel mark. If we go longer term, and we also see infrastructure specifically being targeted, and I think that is something that we did see over the weekend, where there were specific drones sent out from Iran and targeting infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, Saudi Aramco. If that refining infrastructure is targeted and it is damaged, that will obviously have substantial impacts, because that's not the sort of infrastructure you fix over the course of a month or two. It's a huge issue to obviously repair anything that's damaged. There we could see a spike up to about $130 per barrel. Again, though, as new supplies or new producers are brought online or stocks are redistributed, we ultimately anticipate that would probably see a revision back down to around about $80 by the end of the year.
Luke, thank you so much for taking us through that $100 per barrel price, and if it will go down to 70, should there be a normalization, but also just throwing forward and casting forward that should the war continue, what is the worst case scenario and how different economies around the world are being impacted by this. Luke Morovitz, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. He's Alliance Trade's country manager for South Africa, and he takes us to exactly 20 minutes after 4.
Using Scholar Transport comes with responsibilities. Every learner has a role to play in keeping themselves, their friends, and the driver safe. Stay seated and behave responsibly. Avoid shouting, pushing, standing, or moving around inside the vehicle at any time. Think safety first. Remember that safety starts before the journey begins and continues until you are safely off the road. Good behavior saves lives. Your actions matter. Issued by the National Department of Transport.
África. Conhece o Ntivani?
Claro que sou eu.
Ntivani é o amante da música de corpo e alma.
Eu amo música africana.
Ele aprecia todos os tipos de melodias e passa os seus dias a ouvir a Channel África. Okay. Adivinha só, a Channel África quer ajudar o Ntivani e os amantes da música em todo o lado a descobrir ainda mais música incrível. Por isso, a Channel África está a convocar artistas africanos a submeterem as suas músicas. Músicos, lembrem-se de nos dar todas as informações relevantes no music@channelafrica.co.za. As submissões são a vossa oportunidade de ser ouvidos, mas não garantem inclusão na lista. Todas as submissões serão cuidadosamente analisadas para verificar se cumprem os requisitos da nossa estação. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Thami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is in Brazil for a state visit where he will meet with his counterpart, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The visit aims to strengthen diplomatic and political ties while boosting economic and commercial relations. Brazil, Latin America's largest economy, remains a key strategic partner for South Africa in its efforts to expand trade. For more on this, we joined on the line by Thembisa Fakude, a senior researcher and director at AfriCID. A very good afternoon to you. Good to be talking to you in Africa in Business. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, Thembisa, how does this visit fit into the broader BRICS economic agenda? given that both countries are members of BRICS, and considering that both countries are members, how might this then strengthen economic coordination within the bloc?
I think the concentration is certainly going to be on economic. I've looked at the agenda of the president and the kind of meetings that will be taking place, including the delegation that is taken. He's certainly concentrating on business, except of course for the inclusion of Angel Motshekga, who's the Minister of Defense. But the rest of the of his contingent or the people accompanying him are all ministers holding positions that have got to do with economic clusters, including tourism and, of course, sport, with Gaten McKenzie joining that visit. What is, of course, for me of interest is that there are a lot of bilaterals that are taking place within members of BRICS. Instead of having this bloc thinking and bloc negotiations, we are seeing many of them going it alone. This started when Donald Trump, of course, came up with his trade tariffs. One would have expected that was going to be a bloc position, and that wasn't the case. China negotiated alone, South Africa is negotiating alone. And what we see at the moment in Brazil, meeting between Lula da Silva and President Cyril Ramaphosa, again, it's strengthening bilateral relationship and economic relationship between Brazil and South Africa. I don't think a discussion on BRICS is going to be dominating these discussions. These discussions are likely going to be dominated by bilaterals between the two countries.
And I mean, could South Africa then leverage this visit to diversify its export markets beyond its traditional partners?
I think that's the whole point. And by the way, notwithstanding the distance, but it's actually direct transport without any hindrance from South Africa to Brazil, because we're sharing the same waters and it's just straight through into Brazil. So it might just be a good move for us to establish and strengthen particularly economic ties between ourselves and Brazil. Tourism-wise, I think there's a lot of potential. We share a lot with the Brazilians in terms of demographics and just the general culture between the people of Brazil, except of course the language is a bit only thing that it's dividing us. But everything else, if you go to Brazil, you might just think in South Africa because people look like South Africans. So that I think is going to help in terms of improving and encouraging tourism, and I think that's what President Ramaphosa is there to do.
So let's look at the other sectors. I mean, you've mentioned tourism, quite broadly there. But what are the other sectors where bilateral trade could flow between the two?
I think, notwithstanding what I've said about Angel Motshekga being there, I think also in terms of defense systems and products that we have in South Africa, there is a capability in this country that can easily be exported to Brazil. Brazil, notwithstanding, is bracing itself as well, because it's not in really good books with the United States. So it is concerned about its security and future in the Atlantic. So I think that discussion is going to be taking place. But more than that, Cyril Ramaphosa, I think, will have other side discussions with Brazil, particularly when it comes to cooperation on matters of security, because South Africa, I think, has reached a point where it now has to graduate and start thinking like the rest of these vulnerable countries around the world, given that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have got an axe to grind with this country, and we can't just pretend there is no threat looming somewhere after their projects, whether it's in Iran or Cuba. Who knows? Who might be the next? And Brazil might just come handy because they've got a strong military presence within the Atlantic. Their navy is quite strong, and they've got a much more longer and more matured experience in terms of navy compared to South Africa. And I think that, to an extent, will be a discussion that President Ramaphosa, with the assistance of Angel Motshekga, will be holding.
I'm going to ask you to speculate here, right? And maybe just make use of historical knowledge. We are in a very globally tense period as far as global politics are concerned because of the Iran situation. Now, in light of these global tensions, how significant is Brazil as a strategic partner for South Africa? Would an Andrew Motshekga, a Minister of Defense, for example, would that particular portfolio been part of a visit of this nature had it not been for the current circumstances?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think what we see happening now is South Africa clandestinely beginning to negotiate with its partners, whether it's Brazil, China, and others, in preparation of whatever it is that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, I believe, might want to do to this country. I strongly believe that this laughable accusation of the white genocide is not by chance, or was not by chance, could be used as a pretext. As Donald Trump has used a lot of pretexts in the past to invade countries and abduct President, particularly Nicolas Maduro. So we also have this standing accusation, which, by the way, many within the Republican Party in the United States believe, and some large parts of Americans believe. So you never know whether this could be used to sell a war or a sort of aggression against South Africa. So the presence of Andrew Motshekga is key, but I don't see Brazil presenting or offering South Africa any other assistance except learning platforms and experience sharing and information sharing, but to expect that Brazil is going to join in a actual process of protecting South Africa from possible attacks or aggression from any other country, I don't think that's the case, at least from this visit.
Back to the economic focus of this trade visit. How might the stronger South Africa-Brazil economic ties influence the trade dynamics in Southern Africa as a whole and Latin America?
Well, South Africa is on a charm offensive at the moment in terms of looking and searching for alternative markets, given that Donald Trump has issued those trade tariffs that, of course, at the moment have been suspended because of the ruling in the United States, but we also had the AGOA being renewed. But South Africa can't be caught unawares next time when it comes to these kind of situations, particularly economic dictatorship from countries such as the United States. So they have to prepare themselves by looking and confirming certain trade deals with alternative markets. And Brazil is a huge market, also part of BRICS, but we also have a very good and long relationship. So economic relationship is likely to benefit both countries. And we can now start looking at the other countries instead of all the time depending on the United States. Brazil has got a lot to offer, particularly alternative products that come from the United States. Brazil can offer those. So with Brazil, China, and others, including Russia, I think the economic prospects of South Africa in terms of diversifying its economy and export and imports are looking much more better than they were before.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that insight, Thembisa Fakode, as we look at relations between South Africa and Brazil, with the South African president, along with his contingent, doing a state visit to Brazil. We thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. That's Thembisa Fakode, is a senior researcher and director at AfriCID. Takes us to exactly 31 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. You know what that means. It means it's time for us to head over to the economics desk, where Thabiso Lehoko is standing by with your latest market indicators.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thanks, Thami, and good afternoon. The dollar in South Africa is trading at 16 Rand 54. Botswana, 13 Pula 37. Namibia, 16 Namibian dollars 54. And Zambia, it's at 19 Kwacha 30. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling. 6 in Ethiopia, it is at 155 for birr, 215. Uganda, 3,000 shilling, 668. And in Tanzania, it's trading at 2,000 shilling, 579. In Nigeria, the dollar will cost you 1,389 naira. In Egypt, it's at a 50 Egyptian pound, 177. In Tunisia, 2 dinar, 920. Algeria, 130 dinar, 387. And the Moroccan dirham is at 174 to the dollar. In Angola, the dollar is trading at 912 kwanza, while the Congolese franc is at 2,140 to the US dollar. And look at commodities markets now. Gold is trading at $5,104, while platinum is at $2,145 per ounce. Brent crude oil is at $102.85 a barrel. For any business stories you would like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business in Johannesburg, I'm Tabiso Lehoku.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
And for the latest from the business of sport, a very good Monday afternoon to you, Figilele Ngwate.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Good Monday to you too, Thami. We begin with rugby news. South Africa win their second successive tournament in Perth and a third out of 5 for the season. While specific figures for the rugby winners' pairs are not explicitly detailed in the public 2026 match reports, the win propelled South Africa to the top of the overall HSBC 7 series standings. A separate unrelated guaranteed jackpot of $100,000 was available in the 2026 Sevens Vancouver 50-50 draw. Celebrating its 11th anniversary, HSBC Sevens Vancouver, in partnership with BC Rugby, is proud to have raised over $1 million in support of BC Rugby and the BC charitable community, including Make-A-Wish Foundation, Ronald McDonald House, YWCA Success, VGH, and UBC Hospital Foundation, the BC Cancer and Thunder Rugby. Now, cricket news. India thrashed New Zealand by 96 runs to become the first team to retain the T20 World Cup and the first to win it for a third time. For winning the 2026 ICC Men's T20 World Cup, India will receive a prize money of $3 million from the ICC, representing a 20% increase from the previous edition. Additionally, the Board of Control for Cricket in India is expected to award substantial separate bonus to the squad. The runners-up pocket $1.6 million. Semi-finalists receive $790,000. Super 8 group stages, teams finishing 5th to 12th receive $380,000, while 13th to 20th receive $250. The total prize pool for the 2026 tournament has increased significantly, highlighting the rising value of the competition. On to football news. South African Minister of Sports, Getty McKenzie, denies that they have paid money for the SAFA elections. Reports at the time indicated that the Department of Sports had already paid $120,000 to SAFA to organize the proposed Indaba. But the football governing body insisted that only SAFA had the mandate to call such a national football assembly. McKenzie also denies having seen any report with regards to this $120,000.
My brother, there's many reports in the department.
No, $2 million for India.
No, can I finish? There's many reports there, my brother. I've not read the 2 million report. That is actually my hobby. I read the reports, but there's so many reports. Government love reports, my brother. So I'm saying, even if there were 2 million paid, was it McKenzie? So I must do what other ministers did. I can't be doing what one minister did it, now I must do it.
But can you confirm it was paid?
I know now I can't confirm it because I've not read it.
McKenzie says based on the national team's current performances, it is not true that all is doom and gloom football-wise in the country.
That's a lie. I'm not saying you lying. Come, I'm going to show you why I say South Africa's football is going through its best times ever. Let me tell you why South African football, and then you must tell me why it's going through the worst. I'm telling you why it's going through the best. We've qualified for WAFCON. We've qualified for AFCON. We've qualified for the World Cup. We've won the under-20. Yes, we've got the PSL paying grants that no other thing is paying. We've got full stadiums. We've got sponsorship that are falling over their feet to sponsor our teams. No, you see, when people want power, they start inventing problems. I'm not saying our football is perfect, my brother, but I'm saying to you, it is not Armageddon.
Let's end with golf news. Englishman Dan Bradbury denied local hero Casey Jarvis with his third straight DP World Tour title. And the Joburg Open had a remarkable overall prize money payout in terms of its number, but the 20.5 million South African rand that was available translates to just over $1.22 million, making it the second smallest purse on the DP World Tour season. It was a figure comparable to the Afro-Asia Bank Mauritius Open, which offered just $1.2 million to those who made the cut at the back end of 2025, while the Australian Open was the third lowest at around $1.4 million. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fikile Lungwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. From markets to innovation. From markets to innovation. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Thank you to Thabiso Lehoko and Figile Lingwati. They bring us to exactly 38 minutes after 4 p.m. as we count down to the launch of Channel Africa's event, a first of its kind on the station. Africa Matters is a platform that aims to engage and find solutions to critical issues on development. The theme for this year is climate change, financing Africa's recovery. Here is Professor Mills Soko, who is a professor of International Business and Strategy at Wits Business School, speaking to my colleague Asanda Beda on why the institution has partnered with Channel Africa on this initiative.
That business school is a leading African business school that is committed to Africa's social and progress and economic development. And we are very interested in this partnership with SABC Channel Africa because we are committed to Africa's development. And we do so in several ways by undertaking research and innovation, that addresses Africa's unique challenges. We are also concerned with equipping our students with the right skills and also disseminating knowledge that speaks to Africa's challenges and opportunities. We also foster entrepreneurship support. We also coordinate engagements of this nature, which involve policymakers, business, and non-state actors in shaping policies that promote Africa's development. So we have a very close and keen interest in this event, which will be the inaugural summit that will be hosting at Wits Business School on the 25th of March in collaboration with SABC Channel Africa.
Africa faces a lot of challenges, as we know, and how significant is it that Africa Matters is focusing on climate change as one of those challenges at this particular time for the continent?
This is significant because climate change is having a devastating impact, on Africa. Despite the fact that our continent contributes minimally, to global carbon emissions, but the impacts are far-reaching, and we have seen that in several manifestations. Extreme weather events. It exacerbating food insecurity. It resulting in high water stress, and it also aggravates health risks. So it is very important for us to tackle this challenge head on. However, we have key challenges in doing so, because we have a problem. First of all, that is the focus of this summit of insufficient funding. And I was looking at the figures here. It is estimated that Africa needs between 187 and 359 billion US dollars annually for climate adaptation, but only 28 billion US dollars was mobilized globally for adaptation recently. And then there's equally the problem of a debt burden that the African continent faces. And the problem is specifically because most adaptation finance comes in the form of loans, and that aggravates Africa's already high debt burden. And then there's also limited private sector involvement in financing, in climate finance. And that is why we have invited development finance institutions, commercial banks, institutional investors, and other business organizations to participate in this summit, so that we can mobilize the necessary finance to deal with this problem.
That was Professor Mills Soko, who is a professor of international business strategy at Wits Business School. The institution has partnered with Channel Africa on the Africa Matters initiative.
African enterprise meets global opportunity. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
It has gone exactly 4:43 Central African time as we turn our focus to money laundering and the financing of terrorism. These remain pressing concerns in the Southern African Development Community region, prompting member states to step up their efforts. Central banks have responded by forging bilateral and multilateral agreements aimed at enhancing regional financial integration, payment systems and monetary stability. In a recent development, the Bank of Namibia and the South African Reserve Bank signed a revised memorandum of understanding to strengthen institutional cooperation. For more on this, we joined on the line by the spokesperson for the South African Reserve Bank, Yolanda Vacha. A very good afternoon to you. Good to be talking to you in African Business. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Thami. Thank you for having me.
Now, ma'am, what role do bilateral agreements between the South African Reserve Bank and other SADC central banks play in strengthening regional financial stability?
So, Thami, these MOUs, as well as bilateral agreements that we have with many of the central banks, stem from cooperation agreements that we have through committees such as your SADC committees, as well as your central bank governors committees and other regional groupings. So when we have those groupings, it then translates into collaboration and cooperation discussions which can be taken further and outside of the individual groupings. And so the MOUs are then entered into bilaterally with various central banks in the region, depending on the need as well as, the topics of interest at the time. So some MOUs that we have with central banks would be about 10 years old. Some would be maybe even older than that. And from time to time, we then look at the MOUs and we update the agreements based on emerging topics, such as what you've mentioned, payments, anti-money laundering, as well as, resolution issues.
I do understand that the details of these MOUs may differ, as you say, depending on the circumstances at hand. But what are the main objectives of these agreements, and how do they then support monetary and financial cooperation within SADC?
So the details are, I will keep them very high level because, the details are different for the various MOUs. But I think the important thing is very critically for cooperation is that we need to share information. We need to be able to cooperate in the event that there is a crisis at either of the central banks, if any of the institutions run into a crisis. And we need to be able to share that information confidentially, as well as knowing that it can be utilized, on the other end without compromising the integrity of the financial institutions. So that's largely what the MOUs do. It's information sharing agreements on specific central banking matters. And so with the Namibia MOU, for example, we first signed the MOU in 2015. September 2015. And so it's been over 10 years with the MOU in place. And so it was time to just refresh the MOU and focus on some of the emerging themes that the Central Bank of Namibia was interested in having a cooperation and information sharing arrangement with us.
Right. And that's the MOU really with the Bank of Namibia that focuses on enhancing rather the regional financial stability and integration within the region. But I wonder, with the financing of terrorism being a major concern, how does the South African Reserve Bank, as well as other central banks, share intelligence on emerging risks, including money laundering and fraud?
So, Thami, one of the things that is, included in the MOU is on financial crime. So, one of the topics that we will cooperate on with the Bank of Namibia is on financial crime. So, this is important in the context of South Africa just having recently come off the FATF grey list. And so, with the experience that we've had, having been on the FATF grey list and being taken off the grey list, that is one of the things that we would cooperate on with the Central Bank of Namibia, but also with any other central banks via various, other platforms. So one of the platforms that we recently had was a benchmarking peer-to-peer sharing exercise where we invited many of the central banks to come to the South African Reserve Bank and learn a bit more from our departments, what we do, the challenges that we experience, as well as to have some key takeaways that they can utilize in their own central banks. So we do spread the knowledge as much as we can, but we also do rely on the specific, MOUs for information that may be deemed to be confidential.
And how could stronger cooperation between SADC central banks support the growth of intra-African trade under the African Continental Free Trade Area?
So, Thami, I think I've already mentioned that, for example, Namibia and Lesotho form part of the Common Monetary Area. So that is one platform where we interact in the Common Monetary Area. But we also engage on the Committee of Central Bank Governors in the SADC region. And then there's a broader grouping which covers the entire continent, which is the Association for African Central Banks, also known as the AACB. So these various forums, this is where the discussions take place in terms of how to strengthen the financial system and to, discuss topics that are emerging for African central banks in general. So it's not limited to just the SADC region. The SADC region would also take their issues to, the AACB, and those would be tabled there. And then everybody breaks away, and then we come up with solutions as to how we can strengthen, whether it's region by region or inter-African. And so that is how the mechanism works, is that we do ultimately get together and discuss these issues, and that is the platform that we use to then make decisions going forward on African trade and as well as cooperation on the continent.
All right, ma'am. Thank you so much. We'll leave it at that for this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time there, highlighting relationships between various central banks on the continent, specifically in the SADC area, and how intra-African trade is really being influenced, and an alignment in policy and making these cross-border trading and transactions much more seamless, while also focusing on issues of terrorism and the financing of terrorism and money laundering. We thank you for your time, ma'am. That was Yolanda Vatsa. She is the spokesperson for the South African Reserve Bank. She takes us to exactly 4:51.
Your life, your rhythm, your Africa. Channel Africa. Find it for free on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
In about 9 minutes' time, Africa in Business will be handing the reins over to the French desk for Vous d'Afrique. And standing by is the captain of that ship, Joël. Bonjour, madame.
Bonjour. Bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa sur Vue d'Afrique. Dans quelques petites minutes, il s'agira notamment du Burkina Faso. Plusieurs morts dans une attaque contre un détachement de police. Et nous parlerons aussi de la Guinée, le principal chef de l'opposition et la résistance directe, la dissolution de 40 partis politiques accusés de ne pas avoir respecté leurs obligations légales. Et nous parlerons également d'une étude qui alerte sur la prolifération des drogues de synthèse qui constituent l'un des défis les plus urgents pour la santé publique. C'est tout à l'heure sur Vue d'Afrique. Merci Thami.
Merci beaucoup. She joins us at the top of the hour.
Stay tuned to Channel Africa. Stream us on our new and updated website, channelafrica.co.za. Africa in Business. Africa in Business delivers key insights and real-time updates on Africa's growing markets with Thami Ngubeni. The African Perspective on Channel Africa.
Channel Africa. So we wrap up our Africa in Business today with our F&B slot, and we'll be looking at South Africa's gross domestic product, the GDP, mining as well as manufacturing data. And for more on this afternoon, we joined on the line by Thanda Sithole, who's senior economist at FNB. A very good afternoon to you, Thanda. Good to have you with us. Welcome.
Afternoon, Thami. Thanks for welcoming me to your show.
So let's start with the big one, Thanda. The finance minister projects GDP to above 1%. Does that align with your projections?
Yeah, no, that's correct. So we also have GDP staying above 1% throughout the forecast period. So we estimate that 2025 GDP growth was likely around 1.3%, which is a significant jump from 0.5% growth for 2024. So it might seem small, but I think in terms of the jump from that 0.5 is significant. The finance minister has got an estimate of 1.4%. Let me say the national treasurer has got an estimate of 1.4% for 2025, and then rising to 2% by 2028. Ours rise to 1.8% by 2028. But generally, the story is that growth is likely going to be above 1% over the forecast period.
So zooming in on those stats for a moment, which of the sectors do you anticipate will be contributing the most to the GDP and which are most likely not to?
So as far as Q4 GDP data is concerned, which is the one that is going to be published tomorrow by Status A, our estimate is that the growth momentum largely continued, although at a slower pace. So we've got an estimate of 0.3% quarter on quarter for the fourth quarter, down from 0.5% in Q3. We think that growth is largely going to be driven by the retail trade sector, reflecting the continued spending momentum by the consumers as a result of lower inflation, as well as interest rate cuts that have materialized so far of about 150 basis points since the start of the cutting cycle. And then also some of the services sectors that we unfortunately don't have high frequency data on, such as the financial services sector. So we think that sector is also going to contribute to that growth that we forecast for Q4 of last year. I think the drag is going to come from obviously mining and manufacturing. We see that those have already indicated contraction on a quarter-on-quarter basis. So that's where the drag is going to be. And then obviously the risk to our estimate of 0.3% also will emanate from the agricultural sector, which is notoriously volatile and can actually swing the estimate to either side of the point forecast that we have of 0.3%. So that's where we are concerned. But I think generally we should see growth 3% for the whole of last year, which is a positive thing.
The FNB Burr conference is also out this week. And with the improved economic conditions, are you expecting confidence to increase?
The FNB are building confidence index, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that data has already come out. It came out this morning, if I'm not mistaken. The outcome was stable, basically unchanged from fourth quarter. But I think to give a context, at the current level, the building confidence index is at highest in almost about 10 years or so. So I think it's even if it didn't move, stayed steady. I think it's still positive where it is. We think that going forward, infrastructure projects, improvements in mortgage space or residential property space should actually support building activity, which will be positive for BR, Business Confidence Index.
And later in the week, there are also some insights on how our mining and manufacturing sectors would have performed in the month of February. What are your expectations there? Positive picture or more along the quarter-by-quarter contraction for both those sectors?
We are hoping for a positive picture. Obviously, it will be the first data print from those two sectors for this year. It will be data for January. We are hoping for a better print, but of course these things are highly volatile. If you look at what has happened already up to Q4 of next year, quarter contraction in both those sectors. But we hope that with domestic demand improving and the external environment remaining stable, at least from a growth perspective, we could ultimately see some recovery. The other data that is already out, which also gives an indication of what is likely has happened in the first quarter, is the electricity data, which came out last week. Year on year, it was down still significantly, but on a month-on-month basis, it improved by about 1.5% on a seasonal adjusted basis. So if we can get an outcome like that also from mining and manufacturing, it will be positive for first quarter GDP growth.
Thanda Sithole, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That's Thanda Sithole, senior economist at FNB. He takes us to exactly 2 minutes to 5 p.m. Central African time, and that's how we fold the Monday edition of Africa in Business. Thank you for having stayed with us as we hand the reins over now to the French desk and Vue d'Afrique. From myself, Thami Ngubeni, and the